There was a terrible accident that occurred on Adam Air Flight 574, and it was something that should have never happened. Introduction. On January 1st, 2007, Adam Air Flight 574 vanished from radar over the Makassar Strait, Indonesia. The Boeing 737-400 was traveling from Surabaya to Manado when it suddenly lost control and crashed into the water, resulting in the deaths of all 102 people on board, including the crew and passengers. It was not merely a fortuitous accident that led to the catastrophe. Rather, it was the product of systematic failings in airline management, aircraft maintenance, and pilot training. As a result of the catastrophe, Indonesia and the aviation community throughout the world were stunned. It brought to light significant shortcomings in the operations of low-cost airlines and ultimately resulted in the closure of Adam Air. This is the complete account, beginning with the controversial growth of the airline, continuing through the fatal minutes of Flight 574, the tedious quest for answers, and ending with the long-lasting impact on aviation safety. Adam Air and Indonesia's struggling aviation sector. Some background information with Adam Air. 1. The ascent of Adam Air was established in 2003 by Agung Laksono, a businessman and politician, along with his son, Adam Aditya Suherman, for whom the airline was called. Adam Air was named after Adam Aditya Suherman. The airline was billed as a budget airline that offered extremely low tickets to make air travel more accessible across the vast archipelago that is Indonesia. On the other hand, a concerning lack of monitoring was the driving force for its rapid expansion. The aircraft was pushed to their operational limits, with very little break for maintenance on account of the situation. It was common for pilots to be overworked and given inadequate training. It was common practice to take shortcuts in maintenance, which resulted in aircraft continuing to move forward while having significant technical problems. Even though Adam Air had already been identified for many safety concerns before the accident that occurred with Flight 574, including a structural breakdown that occurred in the middle of flight on a different aircraft and a hard landing that created a fracture in the fuselage, the airline continued to operate without taking responsibility for its actions. There are concerns regarding the safety of aviation in Indonesia. At the beginning of the 21st century, Indonesia had one of the aviation markets that was expanding at the quickest rate in the world, but it also had one of the poorest safety records. There was a widespread prevalence of inexperienced pilots and crews. The regulatory agencies used to have very little capacity to implement regulations. Several aviation safety authorities were beset by instances of corruption and poor administration. Adam Air was a manifestation of this larger problem, which was that it was a poorly regulated airline operating in a government that was having trouble considering safety rather than profits. The last flight. What happened to Adam Air 574? On January 1st, 2007, at 12:59 local time, 5:59 UTC, the plane took off from Wanda Airport in Surabaya with 96 passengers on board, consisting of 85 adults, 7 children, and 4 newborns. The load factor was 56%, and there were 6 crew members on board. The passenger list was primarily made up of Indonesian nationals, with the majority of the passengers returning to Manado following New Year's Day. The only foreign passengers were a family of 3 from the United States of America and a German national. It is the 2-hour trip, which was supposed to arrive at Sam Ratulangi Airport in Manado at 1600 local time, was operating normally up to the point where the plane disappeared from the radar screens of the air traffic control system in Makassar, South Sulawesi, with the last contact occurring at approximately 1500 local school time. 11. 8. A Singaporean satellite was able to identify the location of the beacon's most recent known position. The radar screen displayed the plane's altitude as 35,000 feet, 10,670 meters above the ground. Sulawesi Island, which is seen in light green on the map, is located among the other islands that make up Indonesia. The weather in the vicinity was stormy. The Indonesian Bureau of Meteorology and Geophysics reported that the cloud tops reached heights of up to 30,000 feet, 9,140 meters, and that the average wind speed in the region was 30 knots, 56 kilometers per hour. Even though the Juanda Airport operator, PT Angkasa Pura I, had provided the pilot with information regarding the weather conditions, the plane continued to depart as planned. The aircraft encountered cross winds of more than 70 knots, 130 kilometers per hour, 81 miles per hour over the Makassar Strait, which is located west of Sulawesi. The pilots were aware of a peculiarity in the inertial reference system, IRS, which became the source of the problems. This resulted in the autopilot being disengaged with a 4-second autopilot disconnect tone, which effectively required the captain to take control of the aircraft and fly it straight and level for 30 seconds while the realignment process was being completed. The first officer then attempted to troubleshoot the situation by resetting his IRS unit by turning the knob on his side to the attitude ATT mode. No one on the crew observed that the autopilot was no longer active, and the captain did not take charge of the situation. The airplane's nose dropped and it began to roll to the right as a result of previous maintenance issues that involved the ailerons of the aircraft. An audio warning referred to as bank angle was activated in the cockpit when the aircraft reached a right bank angle of 35 degrees and continued to increase. The inability of the pilots to effectively monitor the flight instruments, particularly during the last 2 minutes of the flight, was one of the contributing reasons that led to this tragedy. Other factors also had a role in the accident. Because both pilots were preoccupied with a malfunction of the inertial reference system, IRS, their attention was diverted away from the flying instruments. As a result, the increasing bank angle in descent went unreported. The pilots failed to notice and appropriately arrest the descent promptly, which prevented them from losing control of the aircraft. In the hopes of reversing the situation, Captain Widodo instructed the first officer to switch the IRS mode back to the new navigational mode. Now that the attitude indicator of the first officer had returned to its usual state, First Officer Susanto was able to recognize that the aircraft was in a precarious position. He made an effort to inform the captain of this situation. He then attempted to rescue the airplane from its drop by shifting the yoke to the left, but this particular strategy was unsuccessful. Captain Widodo, who was under the impression that the aircraft was flying in a straight and level path, then mistakenly reminded First Officer Susanto that the aircraft was required to fly in a straight and level path to finish the IRS alignment process. At that moment, the aircraft was in a right bank of 100 degrees and had a nose-down attitude of 60 degrees. They were able to successfully inform the captain of their position thanks to First Officer Susanto. Captain Widodo pulled back on his yoke in response to the first officer's instruction to do so to halt the rapid descent toward the sea. As a result, the aircraft, which was traveling at Mach 0.926926% the speed of sound, experienced a force that was 3.5 times the force of gravity at a calibrated airspeed of 490 knots, which was significantly higher than its maximum speed, and it started to disintegrate while it was in the air. At a height of 9,000 feet, all records came to a halt, most likely because the aircraft had completely disintegrated. Additionally, the airplane did not transmit any distress signals. What could have been worse? 1. Failure of the navigation system, IRS malfunction. The inertial reference system, IRS of the aircraft, which is responsible for providing vital navigation data, failed in the middle of the flight. Although Atom Air had a history of operating aircraft with flawed IRS systems, the airline continued to operate aircraft with this known problem. As opposed to manually flying the aircraft, the pilots made an effort to troubleshoot the problem. The plane progressively leaned right without the crew realizing it, which resulted in the plane being unstable. Second, pilot distraction and loss of control. Neither pilot recognized that the aircraft was gradually diverging from its intended path until it was too late. When they finally became aware of the issue, the plane had already entered a bank angle that could not be recovered from. Both pilots were preoccupied with repairing the IRS rather than manually piloting the airplane, which was a crucial error. 3. High-speed dive and structural failure. As the aircraft nosedived at speeds above 600 miles per hour, it was subjected to high aerodynamic stress. It was then that the fuselage started to disintegrate. The flight data revealed that there was a significant structural collapse before the accident. The airplane went down in the water, shattering into thousands of pieces when it was in the water. The search, the recovery, and the investigation are all In the beginning, there were erroneous reports that claimed the plane had successfully landed. This led to a delay in the search and spread of misinformation. The search and rescue infrastructure in Indonesia was inadequate, which made it difficult for the Indonesian authorities to find the wreckage. January 11, 2007, 10 days after the disaster, was the date that the first debris was discovered. 2. Black box recovery and investigation findings. August 2007. The black boxes were recovered from a depth of 2,000 meters below the water with the assistance of teams from the United States of America and Singapore. Following the completion of the investigation, it was determined that the primary reason was a pilot error caused by distraction. The ineffective maintenance procedures played a crucial influence in the incident. Because Adam Air had chosen to fly problematic aircraft rather than ground them, the company had chosen to disregard past IRS failures. What are the repercussions and the effects? 1. Victims and compensation. A total of 102 lives were lost, including those of families, students, and business travelers. Many people believe that justice was not done, even though compensation was granted to the families of the victims. 2. The collapse of Adam Air. In March of 2008, Adam Air's activities were permanently shut down as a result of more safety infractions. The financial investors of the airline withdrew their support, so ensuring the carrier's demise. The European Union and the United States have prohibited all Indonesian airlines from operating within their airspace. This is the third and final aviation safety reform. The enforcement of more stringent safety requirements was carried out. The authorities in charge of aviation in Indonesia have increased their supervision of low-cost airlines. To avoid making mistakes of a similar nature, pilots were provided with improved training that emphasized crew resource management (CRM) recovery. After surveying the location of the aircraft accident in Sulawesi, the United States Navy ship Mary Sears anchored in Singapore. On the 26th of January in 2007, Adam Air and the Indonesian government were involved in a disagreement regarding the retrieval of the black boxes. There was a requirement for an underwater remotely operated vehicle for the retrieval process because of the depth involved. However, Indonesia did not possess such equipment. The Vice President of Indonesia, Yusuf Kalla, went so far as to question whether or not it was necessary to collect the black boxes at all. However, in response, experts stated that the disaster was of international relevance since it could show that there was a problem with the aircraft. While Adam Air expressed its belief that the black boxes ought to be recovered, describing the accident as being significant on both the national and international levels, the company declined to pay for the recovery of the black boxes, stating that it was the obligation of the government to do so. There was a request made by Indonesia to the United States of America, Japan, and France for technical assistance. As the 30-day battery life of the boxes was due to expire at that point, Jim Hall, a former chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board in the United States, stated that the boxes needed to be recovered as quickly as possible. This is something that ultimately occurred. The difficulties that he identified included little visibility and strong currents, both of which made it difficult to retrieve the devices in the absence of information. In a report that was published on the 31st of January, it was said that the United States military had to remove the vessel Mary Sears from the search operations since the vessel was assigned to other responsibilities. For the United States to provide further cash in assistance, the Congress of the United States would need to provide its approval. At the same time, it was claimed that the black boxes may be retrieved by companies that were not affiliated with the organization. There was a continuation of Indonesia's efforts to seek assistance from other nations, including France and Japan. Setio Raharjo, the head of Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, expressed his belief that Adam Air ought to be responsible for the expenditures associated with the recovery services. The tragic event that occurred on Adam Air Flight 574 could have been prevented. It brought to light the irresponsible practices of low-cost airlines and compelled safety measures that had been coming for a very long time. Even though there is no way to bring back the 102 lives that were lost, their narrative serves as a strong warning of the consequence of incompetence in the aviation industry. Please include your opinions in the comment section. Please like, share, and subscribe for other aviation stories.